Hey guys, welcome back to episode number 2 of Economic Challenges. So in this video, we're going to really focus on poverty and the challenges that millions and millions of Americans have to face. So when we look at poverty, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But we're going to look at kind of the bare bones analysis to this, and we're going to look at the federal government sets a certain standard of what the income poverty level should be for Americans. So we're going to look at the poverty level in 2019 and try to really kind of understand like what the numbers look like and what poverty really looks like in the United States, and to find out these numbers that they're using, are they really good gauges to understand what the quality of life should be in the richest, most powerful country in the world. So guys, the slide that you're looking at now shows what the statistics are for poverty levels in the United States in 2019. So if you're looking at that graph and you see a household of one person, so you are a single person claiming yourself and no one else on your taxes, they're going to say the poverty threshold is $16,000, a little bit north of that. I did the math on this. So if you were to work every possible day that you could for the entire year earning minimum wage in New York, you would make a little over $24,000 a year. So think about that. If you're working minimum wage every day, you're going to make $8,000 more than the poverty threshold. So if we do the math on this, the poverty threshold that they're identifying based upon federal levels isn't even congruent with the idea of minimum wage. And the reason why that matters is that people are going to qualify for federal assistance and need based upon these poverty lines. And guys, really take a second and think about, like, if you were working every single day, earning minimum wage, like, what is your life standard still going to be? $24,000 a year may seem like a lot right now as an 18-year-old, but all of a sudden, when you start putting in that you got to factor in rent, and you got to pay for car insurance, and you got to pay for all your utilities and college loans and all these things, $24,000 is going to go by really, really, really quick. And that's going to definitely impact the standard of your living. So imagine what that's going to do for someone at $16,000 on how kind of myopic of a number that is, and if that's a fair standard to decide whether or not someone is in need of government assistance. Another staggering number that you look at, guys, is the poverty rate in the United States. The fact that we constantly hear boasting about how great our economy is and how low our unemployment percentages were, but the fact that you still have millions and millions of Americans, over 12%, that are living below that poverty line. And as we discussed on the previous slide, recognizing like if you're living below that poverty line, you're really struggling to make ends meet. You're living in substandard living conditions, and it's just kind of a really difficult way to live. So what we're going to do is really kind of analyze why. So what happens to put someone in a situation where they are kind of fixed on this or fixed in the situation of being below the poverty line. As we keep looking at statistics and data, another alarming image that we see is just the discrepancy between minorities in the United States and the income disparity that we see. Recognizing that between the different minorities in the US, there are huge, huge gaps between income. And unfortunately, what we're finding is that it's more and more difficult for minority groups to really try to get out of the cyclical poverty that they're finding between generations. When you look at all the data and you look at the statistics, one of the questions that you want to understand is what causes poverty? And the single most direct issue that we have is the education issue. Guys, it is clear as day that the more education that you have in the United States, the more money that you are going to make. You can see on the slide the fact that high school kids are barely pushing $20,000 a year. And guys, I mean, if you don't have a high school degree, I mean, it's really setting you for the fact that you are probably going to be in a situation where you are living close to the poverty line. You get your high school degree or a GED, that's great, but it's really not pushing you really that far beyond the poverty line. But if you're getting a 4-year degree, you're going on to get your master's degree, or a big or to this is the fact that you have a skill or a trade that's going to be able to make you money. That's really going to push you well beyond that poverty line, and you're going to be living in a situation income based that you're going to be very, very comfortable with. But if you don't have education, if you don't have a skill set, that's going to be the most direct cause that could lead to the fact that you're living in a poverty stricken situation. Another cause that leads to poverty was this phenomena that happened really after World War II. And I know I'm going off the slide here quite a bit, but this is kind of an interesting thing to think about. During the 1950s and 60s, what we found is that a lot of people were moving out of the cities. And this based upon a race, we're looking at, we called it the white flight. That's what historians kind of recognize this as. And it was a time where white Americans were moving out of the cities and they were moving into the suburbs. And what happened is, as white Americans were moving out of the cities and moving into these new suburban rings around major cities, they brought with them a great deal of wealth. So they were pulling that wealth out of the cities. So they're building their factories outside of the city. They're building schools outside of the city. So they're building a lot of these new jobs outside of the city centers. Well, the problem with that is when these jobs are being built outside of the city centers, people that were left living in the cities, unfortunately, what we looked at is lower socioeconomic citizens, particularly minorities. There was an inability for people to be able to get to these new jobs simply because there wasn't transportation. So all of a sudden now these jobs are leaving the cities and they're moving out to the suburbs, and there's only certain people that are able to get themselves to and from the suburbs, and that starts to create the situation of the haves and have-nots. I think of one of my favorite examples is if you look at the city of Buffalo. Look at our train station. The train, it literally just runs in a straight line going from UB South down to the Inner Harbor, but that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else. So for anybody living in the city, if they wanted to try to use mass transit as a way to get somewhere, they really couldn't. Um, and it's really kind of a sad thing is that during this time period, it was, during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was a way to try to isolate, white Americans from minorities. And it's really kind of an ugly, ugly thing to look at for American history. But unfortunately, when we look at poverty levels, that's why we look at, inner city being more poverty stricken, is simply because the jobs were taken out of those locations and put elsewhere where citizens living in the inner city were not able to get to them. Another huge ugly problem that we have in the United States, and that still exists today, is the fact that there is racial and gender discrimination based upon how much people make. But guys, I know you're going to look at the dollar numbers there and you're going to be like, well, Donnelly, how does this work? It's really kind of simple. So if we're all working at the same place, we're going to get paid the same amount of money. So it didn't matter if you're male, female, African American, Hispanic, or white, you're still going to make the same amount of money. That's federal law. What they talk about the discrepancy between the dollars, the women making 75 cents to the males, African Americans and Hispanics making 60 cents. What we're looking at is the fact that females and minorities, they're not given the same opportunities to work the same jobs that white males are being able to work. So those certain jobs are given, white males are given priority or preference to those jobs, and that's what they're talking about, the fact that women are making 75 cents to white men, and that African Americans and Hispanics are making 60 cents for every dollar that a white male makes. And again, it's simply because they're not given the opportunity to have those jobs because they are 100% being discriminated against. Now, there is definitely effort in the United States to try to eliminate any of this discrimination. There are federal laws that are passed, there are acts that are passed, there are tons of things that are passed. But the reality is that when you look at certain jobs or you look at high profile jobs, there definitely tends to be a trend that it is white males. You could look at it in anything. Look between these different causes of poverty, the one thing that we definitely know in the United States, there is a huge issue with income distribution. That was something, if you guys were paying attention with Mr. Simpson when you were talking about Bernie Sanders, this was Bernie's big push, constantly going against the top 1% and the fact that the top 1% has over 50% of the nation's wealth. He's not wrong. I mean, it's definitely a huge disparity. When you're looking at, the lowest 20% of Americans have roughly 3.6%. And then as you start to move up, as you guys can see on the slide, it's not until you get into that highest 20th percentile of the United States that has all of the wealth. And then out of that top 20%, then you're looking the top 1%. It's crazy, the income distribution. So that's where you can constantly see the haves and have-nots. One of my, I guess, best examples to think of this, and I used to talk about this all the time when I taught at Canisius, is if you ever drive down Main Street in the city of Buffalo, you're really going to look at the tale of two cities. On the one side, you have, it's called Depew Ave. So Depew Ave has houses that are pushing for well over $500,000. It's a beautiful neighborhood. It's really kind of spectacular. On the opposite side of Main Street, so I'm talking like 40 feet at the most, and they call it East Depew because they want to make sure that it's not the same, God forbid. You're looking at widespread poverty, and you're looking at income levels right around that $20,000 a year. You're looking at people on government assistance. You're looking at property values that are at $40,000 instead of $400,000. So anywhere in the United States, unfortunately, we see this over and over again between the haves and the have-nots. So the question is then, how do you fix poverty in the United States? Well, one of the things that you find with local municipalities, governments are trying to encourage business development in poverty-stricken areas. They're hoping to entice manufacturing jobs or new businesses, restaurants, bars, whatever, to get brought into these areas with the hopes that they then are going to employ people that live in the neighborhood. The government can do this by giving tax breaks or giving subsidies, trying to encourage new business, which is, in theory, going to then increase the poverty line, just because hopefully then more people are going to start to work there. If it's a really good restaurant, people from outside of that neighborhood are going to come and want to eat there. So the hope is that by encouraging these growth centers, or what they call enterprise zones in the city or in places that are poverty stricken, you're really trying to entice people to bring their money back into these situations to help the people that are living in those communities. Another option that politicians are trying is welfare reform. And what they're trying to do is through the welfare program, instead of having citizens become dependent upon the welfare program, what they want to do is help citizens develop skills and abilities to be able to make themselves marketable in the job labor market so that they can get employment and that they can start earning their own money. And this is a win-win in every way, shape, and form for the government, for the citizens. This is a good investment for government because once they get Americans working, that's going to generate tax revenue. So that's a good thing for the government. It's a good thing for citizens because they're moving themselves out of that poverty line and they're starting to accumulate wealth, whatever that may look like. But they're starting to generate wealth for themselves and move away from dependence upon the government. So this notion of welfare reform, with the sole focus of getting people job skills and job ready so that they can get into the market and find job placement, is a huge, huge push that we're really seeing in society today. And the other thing that we do find, obviously, with poverty is the government needing to help people. And I think, unfortunately, when you look at the notion of welfare programs, I think it really kind of defines, I guess, your political ideology of recognizing how much should the government get involved. Welfare programs, food stamps, and things like that. The government gives poor people money to cover their basic needs. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's where you then start to identify like where do you fit yourselves on this political spectrum of how much should the government get involved? Should it, really try to prep people to get back into the workforce? Is the government there to help people? Should there be time limits? Should there be constraints? What should there be? And that's something that we hear constantly between the Democrats and Republicans that one side is too far, one side is unfair, one side's not doing enough, one side's doing too much. And unfortunately, that's one of the biggest divides that we see in our government today. All right, guys, so after watching the first two videos, what I'm going to have you do is on Google Classroom, there's a link. It's a poverty simulation game. So what I want you to do is I want you to play the game and definitely play it multiple times. It really gives different scenarios that people have to go through. And what you're going to do is once you're done playing the game, however many times that you're going to play it, you're going to write just a brief reflection on what you saw, what you took away from the simulation, what you learned from, and how it relates back to what was discussed in this video.